The coffee was already cold when he said it. Not lukewarm, cold, like something left forgotten. I don't love you anymore. 6 words. No shouting, no tears. Just a simple, quiet collapse of everything she thought was solid. The sunlight spilling through the kitchen window felt wrong, too bright, too indifferent. She stared at him across the table, her fingers frozen around the chipped white mug they'd bought at a yard sale their first year in America. The one they used when they couldn't afford anything else. Back then, they'd laughed about it. Back then, everything had been a joke they shared. Now, even the air between them felt foreign. He didn't look angry. Just done. His eyes darted to the clock behind her, as if timing his escape. 12 years of love had reduced him to a man waiting for his next appointment. You don't mean that, she said quietly. But he didn't answer. He just stood, pushing the chair back with that scraping sound that would echo in her head for months afterward. His voice was careful, almost apologetic. I tried, Mia. I really did. She wanted to scream, to throw the mug, to break something that would sound like the shattering inside her. But instead, she sat there, numb, as he walked to the bedroom, their bedroom, to pack. The drawers opened and closed. Zippers dragged. The sound of his life being folded into a suitcase. When the front door clicked shut, the silence came alive. It wasn't quiet, it buzzed. The refrigerator hum, the distant city traffic, the sound of her heartbeat thudding in her throat. Everything ordinary felt cruelly amplified, like the world was mocking her for still existing. She pressed her palms to her face. Her breath came fast, uneven. And for the first time since moving to America, she didn't know who she was anymore. 2 hours later, she was still sitting there. The coffee had dried into a brown ring on the table. The mug sat like a tombstone. Her phone buzzed with a message from her landlord, rent due next week. She almost laughed. Of course. She had followed him across an ocean, believing love would build their new life. She'd worked double shifts, learned to smile through exhaustion, held her breath every time bills arrived. They had come to chase the American dream, but it seemed she had been dreaming alone. The apartment walls looked smaller now. Photos of them, hiking trails, their first car, a blurry selfie from the airport, stared down at her like witnesses. She took one frame from the shelf and turned it face down. The glass cracked when she set it back. Days blurred into weeks. The house that once smelled of coffee and cinnamon now smelled of dust and loneliness. His things were gone, the suits, the cologne, the laughter. She found a stray sock once behind the dryer and stared at it for 5 minutes, wondering how something so trivial could hurt so much. The bills piled up like unspoken accusations. Her job applications went unanswered. And every night, she replayed that morning in her mind, the cold coffee, the sunlight, the scraping chair. Sometimes she'd talk to the empty room. You said we'd never give up. Other times she'd just stare at the window, watching the city lights, trying to convince herself that people didn't die from heartbreak, they just learned to live smaller. But she couldn't live smaller. Not after everything she had given up to be here. Then came the letter, a crisp white envelope from a law firm she'd never heard of. Divorce papers. She opened it standing in the hallway, and the world seemed to tilt. She signed nothing. She just let the papers fall to the floor. They made a soft, final sound when they hit the tile, like the closing of a door she hadn't realized was already shut. That night, she cried until her body gave up. Not the gentle sobbing of movie heartbreak, but raw, guttural sounds that came from a place deeper than language. She pressed her face into a pillow to keep the neighbors from hearing. When she woke the next morning, her eyes were swollen, her chest hollow. But somewhere beneath the wreckage of her heart, there was a small pulse of something she didn't recognize yet, a stubborn refusal to disappear. One evening, weeks later, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her reflection unfamiliar. Her hair was a mess. Her eyes, tired, red, but alive. She whispered to herself, "You're still here." It wasn't confidence. It was defiance. Outside, the city roared, taxis, sirens, laughter. Life went on, indifferent to her pain. For the first time, she understood that no one was coming to save her. If she wanted to survive, she'd have to start over. As she turned off the light, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. For a second, her breath caught. Could it be him? The screen glowed in the dark. Unknown, we're hiring at the diner on 8th. You still looking for work? She stared at it. The message wasn't romantic. It wasn't even warm. But it was something, a beginning, maybe. She took a deep breath, typed back, "Yes. I'll be there tomorrow." Then she looked at the clock, midnight exactly. A new day beginning. The next morning, she walked into the diner on 8th Street. The bell above the door gave a faint, tired ring, the kind that sounded like it had seen too many mornings and too few smiles. Inside, everything smelled of grease, burnt toast, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. A woman in a faded pink uniform looked her over with a quick, skeptical glance. "You the one who texted last night?" Mia nodded. "Good. We need hands. You start now." That was it. No paperwork, no welcome speech. Just an apron, a sink full of dishes, and a nod toward the back. She rolled up her sleeves. The water was scalding, the plates endless. Soap bubbles clung to her wrists like small ghosts. Her fingers went wrinkled, her back ached, but for the first time in weeks, she was doing something. Moving. Breathing. By closing time, her arms trembled from exhaustion. She left the diner smelling of onions and detergent. The city air hit her like a wave, cold, sharp, alive. She walked home beneath the flickering streetlights, her reflection chasing her in shop windows. That night, she sat by her window again, the one overlooking the city skyline. Below, life glowed in hundreds of windows, people eating, laughing, kissing. She was invisible to them all. But she whispered anyway, as if someone, maybe the city itself, could hear her. "If this country can give people second chances," she said softly, "maybe it can give me one too." The next few months blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion. Wake before dawn. Walk through cold air. Wash dishes until her knuckles cracked. Catch the late bus home. Repeat. When the manager offered her extra shifts cleaning after closing, she took them. When a waitress quit mid-shift, she covered. She learned to smile at customers who never looked her in the eye. Men who snapped fingers. Women who complained about coffee temperatures. She learned the difference between genuine kindness and polite pity. Some nights, she'd return home too tired to eat. She'd collapse onto her small bed, a second-hand mattress that groaned every time she moved, and stare at the ceiling until sleep finally took her. On weekends, she cleaned offices downtown. The smell of lemon polish filled her lungs as she vacuumed silent hallways of people she'd never meet. Sometimes, she'd catch her reflection in a glass wall and almost not recognize herself. The woman who'd come to America with dreams in her eyes was gone. In her place stood someone smaller, quieter, a woman surviving on willpower and cheap coffee. But the city had its own strange way of talking back. One night, after a 12-hour shift, it started to rain. Not the soft kind, the kind that slaps the pavement, relentless. She ran, shoes soaked, until she reached the bus stop. There was a man there, tall, in a long black coat, holding a box of pastries. He offered her one. "Fresh from the bakery down the block," he said with a tired smile. "Can't eat them all myself." She hesitated, then took one. The sugar melted on her tongue. "Warm, soft, perfect." "Good, right?" he asked. She nodded. "Best thing I've tasted in a long time." He chuckled. "Funny thing about baking, it's just patience and heat. You take what's raw and broken, and you make something new." The bus came. He waved, disappeared into the rain, leaving her holding that last piece of sweetness in the night. That night, back in her small apartment, she couldn't sleep. His words replayed in her mind. Patience and heat. Maybe that's what life was doing to her, baking her into something new. She started writing small notes to herself on scraps of paper. "Keep going. Pain is temporary. You are not finished yet." She taped them to the mirror, the fridge, the wall beside her bed. Her reflection slowly began to change. Months turned into a year. She'd been promoted to waitress, not glamorous, but hers. Regular customers began asking for her by name. She learned their stories, their favorite meals. Sometimes, she even laughed again. She saved every dollar she could. Not much, but enough to start imagining something more. Every night, after closing, she lingered in the kitchen, staring at the old oven as the last trays cooled. She loved the smell of bread, warm, alive, forgiving. It reminded her that broken things could rise again. And one evening, as she wiped down the counter, she whispered a promise to herself. "One day, I'll have a place that smells like this. My own." Still, loneliness had a way of sneaking in. Some nights, the silence pressed against her chest. She'd wonder if he ever thought of her, the man who left. Sometimes she'd see couples in the diner, holding hands across the table, and she'd smile, pretending not to ache. But then she'd catch her reflection in the window, tired eyes, yes, but still burning. And she'd whisper again, "You're still here." Late one night, as she was cleaning the last table, the diner owner, an older woman named Ruth, handed her a small envelope. "You've been working too hard," Ruth said. "Take this bonus and go do something nice for yourself." Inside was $200 and a note. "You remind me of me when I started. Don't stop believing you can do more." Mia stood there, the hum of the diner around her, tears quietly blurring her vision. She walked home through the glowing city streets, the envelope pressed to her chest. The lights looked different that night, not distant, but alive, as if the city had finally noticed her. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. That night, the city lights didn't just shine, they pulsed. Mia walked home clutching the small envelope from Ruth, her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. For months she had been invisible, but tonight, someone had seen her. The bonus wasn't much, $200 couldn't change her life. But it changed something inside her. It reminded her that effort mattered, that kindness existed. She fell asleep with the envelope beside her pillow, as if afraid it might vanish by morning. The next day at the diner, the rush came early. The usual chaos, clattering dishes, sizzling grills, voices shouting orders over the hum of conversation. She moved between tables like a quiet current, graceful without realizing it. "Refill?" she asked, her voice calm, practiced. A man looked up from his laptop, tall, mid-40s, sharp suit but soft eyes. He smiled faintly. "Please. And maybe another slice of that apple pie? You're the one who bakes it, right?" She shook her head, smiling politely. "I just serve it." "Well," he said, "you serve it like it's worth something." The compliment caught her off guard. Customers didn't usually talk to her, only at her. She poured the coffee, steady hands, but her pulse was racing. When she came back with the pie, he was still watching her, not in the way men sometimes did, but like someone noticing details for the first time. "Long shift?" he asked. "Always," she said. He chuckled. "You make it look easy." She gave a small, tired laugh. "It's not." Over the next few weeks, he kept coming back. Always at the same corner booth, always ordering the same coffee, black, 2 sugars, apple pie on the side. Sometimes he'd bring paperwork, other times he'd just sit, listening to the diner's noise as if it grounded him. They began to talk, not much at first, just small pieces of conversation that stretched longer each time. He told her his name was Daniel Grant, that he ran a logistics company downtown, that he used to eat in places like this before everything took off. She told him little, only that she'd come from far away, that life had changed, that she was still figuring things out. He never pushed. He just listened. And sometimes, that felt like oxygen. One rainy afternoon, when the diner was nearly empty, he asked quietly, "What do you really want, Mia?" She froze. The question felt dangerous. "I don't know," she said after a moment. "I used to dream about owning something small, a bakery, maybe. But dreams cost money." He leaned forward. "What if someone believed in that dream?" She laughed nervously. "Then they'd be the first." But he didn't laugh back. He studied her, thoughtful. "You remind me of when I started out. I had nothing but a borrowed suit and one good idea. Someone believed in me then. Maybe it's my turn to do the same for someone else." She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "I'm not offering charity," he continued. "I'm offering a chance. Let me mentor you. Help you learn what you'd need to start. If it makes sense later, maybe more." She stared at him. A man she'd known only through coffee refills was now offering to reshape her life. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain drummed against the window like a heartbeat. Her mind raced between fear and hope. What if he's not serious? What if it's a trick? But deeper down, another voice whispered, "What if it's real? What if this is your turn?" She thought of all the nights she'd come home numb, the whispered promises to herself, the note taped to her mirror, "You are not finished yet." Maybe this was the beginning of that truth. The next morning, she found him waiting at his usual booth. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron before walking over. "I thought about your offer," she said quietly. "And I'm scared," she admitted. "But I don't want to be stuck forever." He nodded slowly. "Good. Fear means it matters." He slid a business card across the table. Come by my office tomorrow after your shift. We'll start small, just talk through what it would take to make that bakery real. She took the card. It felt heavier than paper, like possibility. The following day, she showed up in her best dress, simple, clean, the one she'd saved for a someday. The glass doors of his office gleamed like another world. Inside, everything was polished, marble floors, quiet hum of success. She felt completely out of place. But when Daniel saw her, his expression softened. "You made it," he said. "I almost didn't. But you did." They talked for hours. About costs, suppliers, locations. He drew numbers on a notepad, showing her how dreams became plans. She listened, wide-eyed, taking it all in. By the time she left, the city was glowing gold with sunset. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching that notepad full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy, it felt alive. That night, she stood again by her window, city lights stretching to infinity. She remembered the cold coffee, the empty apartment, the pain that once defined her. And now, this new warmth inside her chest. She whispered, "If this is another chance, I won't waste it." The oven clock in the diner blinked midnight in her mind. A new day, again. Somewhere downtown, Daniel checked his watch, smiling faintly. He didn't know why, but he felt certain of something, that the woman who once washed dishes would soon create something extraordinary. The morning after that meeting, Mia woke before sunrise. For the first time in years, she wasn't waking to survive, she was waking to begin. The city outside her window was still half asleep, the streets wrapped in blue-gray mist. She pressed her forehead against the glass and whispered, "Don't let fear steal this from you." Weeks turned into months of relentless effort. Days at the diner, nights filled with numbers, sketches, and recipes scribbled on receipts. Daniel kept his promise, mentorship, guidance, and eventually, quiet investment. But the real work was hers. She visited suppliers, compared flour textures, experimented with recipes in her tiny kitchen until the smell of vanilla clung to her hair. When exhaustion threatened to swallow her, she remembered the words she once wrote on scraps of paper, "Keep going. You are not finished yet." Every time she thought about quitting, she saw her old self, the woman washing dishes under flickering lights, and she kept moving. The day the lease was signed, she cried in the street. It wasn't just any building, it was that building. The same one where she had once scrubbed pans in silence, invisible and forgotten. The irony felt like fate whispering, "See? You were never meant to stay small." The space was run down, cracked tiles, flickering bulbs, peeling paint. But she saw what others couldn't, possibility. Daniel stood beside her, surveying the mess with a grin. "It's perfect," he said. She laughed through her tears. "It's a disaster." He shook his head. So were most dreams before someone believed in them. For weeks, she worked until her body begged for rest. She painted walls herself, sanded counters, learned how to repair an oven from YouTube tutorials. The old diner staff occasionally stopped by to help. Ruth brought coffee, a few regulars donated furniture. Slowly, the space transformed. When the first batch of bread came out of the oven, golden and steaming, she broke a piece off, held it in her hands, and felt the weight of every struggle she'd endured. The scent filled the room, warm, forgiving, alive. It wasn't just bread. It was proof. She named it New Dawn Bakery. The morning it opened, she stood outside before unlocking the door. The city buzzed with life, unaware of her private miracle. She traced the lettering on the window with trembling fingers. Daniel appeared beside her. "You ready?" She smiled. "I've been ready for years." The bell above the door chimed, the same tired sound she remembered from the diner, but now it sang differently. Customers trickled in. Locals curious about the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Strangers who'd walked past that block for years without ever stopping. By noon, the bakery was full. Laughter, chatter, clinking cups, sounds of life returning. When an old regular from the diner recognized her, he said, "Didn't you used to work over on 8th?" She nodded. "I still do. Just not for anyone else anymore." The weeks that followed blurred into something beautiful and exhausting. The bakery grew faster than she imagined. Orders poured in. Newspapers called her the comeback baker. Photos of her smiling behind the counter began to circulate online. But beneath all the attention, she stayed grounded. Every loaf, every pastry, every cup of coffee reminded her where she came from. Sometimes, late at night after closing, she'd sit alone at one of the small tables, the same way she used to sit by her window, watching the reflection of her bakery lights in the glass. She thought of her past life, the cold coffee, the empty apartment, the papers on the floor. And she realized something profound. She didn't need anyone to rescue her. She had done it herself. One evening, Daniel stopped by as she was wiping down the counter. "You did it," he said softly. She looked around, at the glowing ovens, the shelves of bread, the customers' laughter fading into memory. "No," she said. "We did it." He smiled, but there was something more in his eyes, quiet admiration, perhaps even affection. But she wasn't the same woman who once mistook kindness for salvation. She smiled back, grateful but strong. "I'll take it from here," she said gently. He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Weeks later, one slow afternoon, a familiar shadow appeared in the doorway. Her heart stilled. It was him. The man who'd left her over cold coffee now stood at the threshold, holding a box of pastries, her pastries. He looked around, hesitant. "I heard about the place," he said. "I had to see it myself." She wiped her hands on her apron, heart calm. "You just did." He smiled faintly. "You've changed." "No," she said softly. "I just remembered who I was supposed to be." He nodded, lingered a moment, and left. No drama, no tears, just the quiet closing of an old chapter. That night, she stood in front of the bakery window, lights dimmed, city alive beyond the glass. Her reflection stared back, steady, radiant, free. She whispered, "You made it." The smell of fresh bread still filled the air. Somewhere outside, the first hints of dawn stretched across the sky. Mia unlocked the door and stepped out, the cool breeze brushing her face. She looked up at the rising light, soft, gold, forgiving. New Dawn wasn't just the name of her bakery. It was her life now. She had been broken, invisible, forgotten. Now she was her own beginning. The morning sky was streaked with gold when Mia unlocked the bakery door. The air was cool and soft, carrying the faint scent of rain and yeast from yesterday's baking. She flipped on the lights, one by one, and the room came alive, warm, familiar, hers. The sign outside glowed softly, New Dawn Bakery. Every day, she still paused to look at it, as if reminding herself that miracles could be made from nothing but courage, flour, and faith. It had been 2 years since opening day. 2 years of early mornings, dough-covered hands, laughter, mistakes, and small triumphs. The bakery had grown beyond her wildest imagination. A second location was opening soon. Magazines had featured her story, the woman who rebuilt her life from crumbs. She didn't chase the spotlight, but it found her anyway. People came from across the city, drawn not just by the pastries but by the quiet strength behind the counter. And through it all, Daniel stayed, not hovering, not claiming, but supporting. A silent anchor who believed in her long before the world did. They'd become partners in more ways than one. He handled expansion, she handled creation. Their rhythms fit together, practical and poetic, logic and heart. Sometimes, when the shop was quiet, he'd watch her knead dough with that same calm admiration that had once made her nervous. But now she understood it wasn't pity or fascination. It was respect. One quiet afternoon, while wiping flour from her hands, she heard the bell above the door. At first, she didn't look up, just another customer, she thought. But when she turned, the air in her chest stilled. It was him. Her ex-husband stood there, hesitant, eyes scanning the bakery as though trying to recognize the world that no longer belonged to him. "Mia," he said softly, almost uncertainly. "You look different." She smiled faintly. "I am." He looked around, the displays, the flowers on the counter, the soft hum of music. "I've read about you. New Dawn." "I didn't realize," he stopped, his voice catching. "You really did it." "I did," she said, steady. For a moment, silence hung between them, not the sharp silence of heartbreak, but the quiet understanding of two people who had lived different lives since the same ending. He sat down at a corner table, the one where Daniel often worked. She brought him a cup of coffee, hot, black, just how he used to like it. The smell rose between them like memory. "I shouldn't have left the way I did," he said, eyes down. "I thought I needed something bigger. I thought we were stuck." Mia listened, unmoved but not unkind. "I lost myself back then," he continued. "And when I heard about what you built, I realized you found what I'd been searching for." He looked up, voice cracking slightly. "Maybe we could try again." The words hit the air softly, but they carried the weight of 12 years. Mia took a deep breath. She looked at the man who had once been her whole world and saw, for the first time, not pain, but peace. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "What happened broke me, yes. But it also rebuilt me. The woman you loved, she doesn't live here anymore." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I can see that." Daniel stepped out from the back room just then, carrying a clipboard, mid-sentence about suppliers. He stopped when he saw the man at the table, his expression neutral but protective. Her ex stood, extending a hand. "You must be Daniel." Daniel shook it politely. "I've heard a lot about you." "Probably not the best things," the man said, forcing a small laugh. "Enough to know she's stronger because of it," Daniel replied quietly. The two men shared a look, not of rivalry, but understanding. One had broken her, the other had helped her build anew. After a moment, her ex sighed, stepping back. "I'm glad she found someone who sees her." "She found herself," Daniel said simply. Mia's heart tightened at those words, because they were true. When her ex finally left, he didn't look back. The door chimed softly, and then he was gone, a chapter closing with the gentleness it should have always had. She stood for a long moment, watching the empty doorway. Then she smiled. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just release. Daniel came up beside her, brushing a bit of flour from her sleeve. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. "Better than okay." She turned to the window. Outside, the sun was lowering, flooding the bakery in amber light. Customers laughed at the tables, children pressed faces to the glass, pointing at cakes. Life went on, beautifully, endlessly. Later that evening, after closing, she lit one small candle and placed it near the window. It was something she did every anniversary, a quiet thank you to the journey. She sat down with her journal, the same one she'd once filled with survival notes. On a clean page, she wrote, "I thought I came here chasing the American dream. But what I really found was myself." She paused, then added, "And I'm proud of the woman I became when no one was watching." When she stepped outside to lock up, the street was calm. A gentle wind carried the smell of sugar and coffee into the night. Across the street, her reflection shimmered faintly in the bakery glass, no longer fragile, but luminous. Daniel joined her on the sidewalk. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Every morning." They stood together in silence, watching the city lights flicker to life. And as the sky deepened into indigo, Mia whispered, "It's funny. For years, I thought I lost everything. But maybe I just needed to lose myself long enough to find who I was meant to be." Daniel looked at her, eyes warm. "New dawn, right?" She nodded. "Always." They walked down the quiet street, hand in hand, the glow of the bakery behind them like a heartbeat in the dark, proof that broken things can rise again, stronger, softer, and free.